Are you starting to notice that exuding diplomacy with stakeholders in your company is becoming increasingly more important? In this video, I'm going to talk about diplomacy, what it is and why it's hard, and how do you exude diplomacy. Historically, diplomacy has usually been referred to with respects to international relationships, that is, relationships from one country to another. And as the years progressed, we have been talking about diplomacy in the corporate environment as well. Now, in history, when we deal with diplomacy, there were usually two general approaches to diplomacy. The first general approach was referred to as Realpolitik, and Realpolitik was more in terms of power and pragmatism around diplomacy. So this was around when one country approaches another, that they are thinking about their own interests and thinking about how can we distribute power in our favor, and how can we distribute power to have more of a practical application in the real world. So that's Realpolitik. Now, the other approach to diplomacy historically was idealism. And with respects to idealism, this was all around really being mindful and considering the ethical and moral principles. So, for example, in understanding human rights, understanding what is right and wrong, and how can we be doing the right thing. So you have these two general approaches that have gone all the way throughout history: Realpolitik on one side and idealism on the other. Now, historically, as I mentioned, usually diplomacy was with international relations, but especially now in the workplace, in the corporate environments where we have increasingly international teams as well, conglomerate organizations made easier with increasing the rise of technology. Now diplomacy is increasingly and progressively more important in the workplace. So with respect to these two types of approaches, now, you might notice that in your work environment, sometimes there are some leaders who lean more towards Realpolitik. Sometimes there are some leaders who lean more towards idealism. But I'm here to share with you, well, what can you do? What can you do to advocate for yourself and for your ideas, and also for your recommendations? I had a client in my mentorship program where he had this feedback. He's a director at a company, and he's a director of a large conglomerate software company. And he had a performance review with his direct managers. And one of the feedback that he received was that he needs to improve his communications and he needs to be more assertive. Now, as an executive coach, I hear this a lot from my clients, feedback that they need to improve their communications, specifically that assertiveness was important. And as I worked with him in the mentorship, this is where I really helped him to uncover that. What they really meant was that we need to exude more diplomacy. Because as a director level and above, it is going to be more and more in terms of communicating with internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and higher ups as well, and making more strategic level decisions. So sometimes what this client had discovered was that even though the feedback was assertive communication, what they really meant was exuding diplomacy. I am speaking with you from London, England in the moment, and right in front of Big Ben and Westminster Abbey. I've been in London for the past week because I have been invited to do a consultation at Windsor Castle. It was an honor to be invited as a thought leader to share my thoughts around exactly this topic, around diplomacy. So if you are noticing that it's very loud behind me with sirens and honking and everything, and maybe Big Ben going off, please excuse the noise. I will be speaking over it as well, but I hope you enjoy the background. So one of the things that I do teach in my mentorship is, what is diplomacy? If you go to the dictionary and you look at the dictionary definition of diplomacy, and it's really difficult then to apply in your work environment, because the dictionary definition of diplomacy generally refers to international relationships between countries. So what I've done is I've come up with a definition, an understanding, to create an understanding of diplomacy that really helps you to practically apply it to your work environment and in your work relationships. So here it is. What is diplomacy? Diplomacy is how to navigate relationships in the workplace so that they become meaningful relationships with an utmost attunement to the other person's biography, to their background, to their biology even, and the way that they work. So this is diplomacy. How can you create that meaningfulness? Since the essence of diplomacy is all about having utmost attunement to the makeup of the other person, wouldn't it stand to reason that in order to exude diplomacy, we must understand the makeup of the other person? So what makes up an individual? An individual is made up of the sum of their behaviors, their actions, their decisions, and their perspectives. And what drives these things? So if you really go to the essence of why do people do what they do, why do they make those decisions, why do they respond that way, that is important in a relationship, because those are the things that affect the that the effectiveness of the relationship, the outcomes of it as well, and the conversations that we can have. So this is understanding what is called axiology. And axiology is a study of values. Some people refer to it as the theory of values, because if you think about the summation of someone's behaviors, their decisions, their actions, and their reactions, it is all driven by their values. Their values in terms of what they deem to be their priorities, the hierarchy of their priorities, what they deem to be most important and second most important, and so on. And if you go all the way to the top, to the thing that is most important to another person, that is how they are going to see the world. That is how they're going to react. That is how they're going to make moral judgments. That's how they are going to make decisions. That's how they're going to prioritize the decisions that they are making. So as long as you understand axiology and study axiology in those that you interact with, you will have the best chances of exuding diplomacy. And you have the best chances of creating a sustainable fair exchange, which is why and how relationships are meaningful. So what does this mean? It means that the start of diplomacy, the beginnings of exuding diplomacy, is seeking to understand the other person that you are having diplomatic relationships with. And more specifically, seeking to understand their priorities in their hierarchy of values. Now, it is important to point out that values are not the same as idealisms. Remember, when I say idealisms, I'm not referring to the approach of diplomacy of idealism versus realpolitik. In this example, when I say that values are not idealisms, I mean that values are not social idealisms. Now, an example of social idealisms are things like integrity, honesty, right, autonomy. It are things like extroversion. These things are social idealisms, and that's not what makes up values. Values are demonstrable in a person's life. What one person truly values is how they live their life, and it's how they exude how they carry themselves and how they carry out their work as well. So seeking to understand this is the starting point of exuding diplomacy in your relationships in the workplace. Now, I've packed a lot of information in this video. I've shared a lot of different concepts, and all I did was a 30,000-foot view and a general interconnectedness between all these different concepts. But if you're listening to this and you're nodding your head and you do recognize that diplomatic relationships is important for you in your role, if you also receive feedback, like my other client, in terms of assertive communications, the need to improve your communications, then I invite you to work with me. The very first link in the description below is a link to book a call with one of my trusted career advisors. And this is simply a conversation to explore what your challenges are and how we can support you in those challenges. And if it's the right fit, then you're going to come and work directly with me, where I'm going to train you and mentor you and guide you and offer you coaching as well on how to navigate your landscape, on how to exude diplomacy, on what this means. And I'm going to go really deep on the concepts that I shared in this video. And if that is something you are serious about, not curious, but serious about developing yourself, then click the link below, and I look forward to working with you on the inside.